The National Child Protection Week finally kicked off yesterday. Children's rights activists and organizations are calling for law reforms to help cultivate better parental care and the criminal justice system to act tough against offenders. Child Protection Week is about protecting children from violence, exploitation and abuse. Joining us now to discuss this topic is the Teddy Bear Foundation Director, Dr. Shaheda Omar. Dr. Shaheda, good evening and thank you very much for your time. Do weeks like Child Protection Week actually help in bringing awareness, but also in ensuring that things get better?
Well, just to begin with, we are not propagating Child Protection Week. We speak to child protection all the time. Yes, Child Protection Week does enlighten people. It does create awareness. It does highlight the plight and scourge of violence against children, but it also creates an opportunity for rights and responsibilities where children become aware, families become aware of platforms that they can reach out and mobilize action and access support and intervention. However, I think the messaging needs to be constant and consistent. Just speaking during Child Protection Week, having all events and campaigns during this period is not sufficient. It's not going to make an impact if we want to see change and we want to see a reduction and a disruption of the cycle of violence against children.
Yeah. Are we tightening the grip on offenders? I mean, recently we've reported on this horrible, gruesome act in Mpumalanga where a 6-year-old body was missing and discovered near her home, literally mutilated.
So, it's the systems that are failing children. Legislation, I think, we can continue discussing this, but we need to just look at specific cases where child victims were raped and perpetrators were incarcerated, imprisoned, convicted, released on parole, and they go out and re-offend and violate children again. So somewhere the screening, the toolkits that they are using to release prisoners on parole is of grave concern, because we're seeing that this is not an isolated or random act, but this seems to be repeated patterns of behavior by ex-parolees, and children are often the most vulnerable and easy targets and fall prey to these kind of situations. So if we're looking at tightening legislation, certainly that needs to be reviewed. It needs to be amended to ensure the safety and protection of children. Where the school I come from, my thought of belief is that once a perpetrator, once an offender, always an offender, and that is something that one needs to actually consider and ensure that children will remain safe, and that it needs to be foolproof and guaranteed that that perpetrator will not violate against a helpless, vulnerable child again.
Now, even before the pandemic, children's rights to access to food, for example, was greatly challenged. In fact, in some instances, non-existent. It's even worsely affected now with the pandemic. What are some of the proposals? What are some of the things that we should be doing, particularly when we focus on the question of rights to food? And of course, we're also talking fuel prices going up. Things are becoming quite expensive, and I'm sure even for organizations, NGOs and so forth, it becomes rather expensive.
So if we look at Section 28 of the Constitution, it speaks clearly to the rights of children in terms of education, health care, protection, nutrition. And if we just break that down, are we fulfilling that needs? If we look at the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, where in 2025, children should be free. They should, from any form of hunger. And unfortunately, the reality on the ground is that we are finding 1 in 5 children under the age of 5 years are stunted because of malnutrition. And the reality is that it's 27% of the population of children. And this impacts on their social, cognitive, and emotional development, which has long-term implications in terms of their trajectory, in terms of opportunities, studies, drop out of school. So we are missing the mark there, because already a basic lower order need like food is a crime against humanity, where children are not actually having easy access to food. And then education, we've seen during this pandemic that children lost more than 200 days of schooling. And for those children that were able to access and hybrid learning, online, offline, a lot of them struggled to actually recall and remember the information and knowledge that they acquired during that period. So there are many challenges. We know that post-apartheid, in the post-apartheid era, that education was the most important thing. We have made progress where children are, more children are attending primary, secondary, and tertiary institutions. But despite that, we are finding that there's a 25% dropout, and particularly more in your female child. And of course, the concerns around teen pregnancy, the attrition rate, and how it impacts once again, on your girl child in terms of opportunities for employment, for career pathing, etc. So once again, that's another challenge that we are faced with. So it's nutrition, education, healthcare. With teen pregnancies, I'm sorry I'm raising the teen pregnancy issue, but it's so much on the radar right now that even in terms of accessibility and receptiveness to healthcare practitioners or healthcare facilities, the responses elicited are very punitive, humiliating, shameful, and stigmatizing, and that prevents young children from accessing any kind of guidance, support, exploring their options in terms of contraception. So these are factors that we need to consider. But if we look at safety measures, we talk about the right to protection. Where are children safe? They're not safe at homes. Home is supposed to be the place of safety and security. However, children are brutalized, murdered at home, sexually abused at home. It's usually people that are closely related or connected to the child. When the child travels to school and from school or in public places, the child is also subjected to violation. And going to school, either by peers, by educators, there's bullying, cyberbullying, sexual misconduct, and as we see in the teen pregnancy, educator on learner or learner on learner violation, where there's brutalization, there's stabbing, there's all kinds of and shapes and forms of violence that children are experiencing. The online exploitation we see with the advent of technology, and even during the pandemic, where we saw a lot of online cyberbullying, and we even experienced cases of attempted suicide and suicide because of information going viral, where images were sent out and distributed widely. So there are so many challenges. If we think we've made progress, I think we have a lot to still address and work on in terms of protecting children and ensuring their safety. We cannot work with children in isolation. We've got to bring in families. We've got to bring in communities. We've got to bring in civil society, and government needs to partner with all these different nested layers and systems. And we've got to allocate. Government certainly needs to allocate budgets to resources. We create awareness, and then what? We say you have rights and responsibilities. We talk about sexual reproductive health and rights and bodily autonomy, and what happens thereafter. Are they able to access the facilities? Do they have money or transport to go? Is it easily available? Are the resources responsive and receptive? If we look at law enforcement, how responsive are they to children, to victims, and to families? We find that often the responses are quite negative, and families feel that they feel compromised and afraid to actually pursue any law enforcement or pursue a case or take it further. So these are so many challenges that need to be addressed, and we have a long way to come.
Dr. Shaheda Omar, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on, the director of the Teddy Bear Foundation, for that intervention.